Hello, friends. This is Confessions with Amy. Here we share new confessions every day.
They thought I was blind, that I wouldn't catch the sharp edge hidden behind their carefully chosen words, that I would sit there, smiling politely while they carved up my future right in front of me. But I was never that naive. My name is Alara Quinn. I'm 27 years old, and I've always known that family can be the most dangerous battlefield of all. It happened on a sticky summer evening in Savannah, Georgia, at my parents' aging Victorian mansion, a place filled with the ghosts of happier times and the heavy scent of fading promises. The whole family was there, gathered for what they called a celebration, but which felt more like a performance where everyone played a role they were tired of pretending. My parents, Lorraine and Aldrich, sat at the head of the table. Their smiles were tight, their eyes flickering with unspoken tension. My brother Jory was there too, late 20s, a gambler with a charming smile and a reckless streak as wide as the Mississippi. He was the family's golden boy in crisis, the black hole swallowing all their hopes and money. Dinner was moving through the usual forced pleasantries. Talk about the weather, the neighbors, vague updates on my father's struggling law practice, when suddenly, the conversation shifted. "I just don't see another way," my mother said quietly, her voice low but steady, like she was rehearsing something she wished she didn't have to say. She glanced around, making sure no one else could escape her words. "Alara's inheritance. It could cover the rest of Jory's debts. It's the only solution." The room went dead silent, as if someone had thrown a stone into a still pond and everyone was waiting for the splash to settle. I felt my heart slam against my ribs, hot and furious. My fork clattered against my plate, but no one noticed. For a moment, my mind went numb. Then, rage settled in, cold and sharp. I had been expecting this. I knew about Jory's debts, the gambling debts, the overdue credit cards, the loans they begged me not to mention. They thought I was oblivious, but I had been watching from the sidelines, silent and calculating. More than a year ago, when I finally got access to my inheritance from my late grandmother's estate, I didn't touch a dollar. I transferred every cent, nearly $1 million, into a trust fund. A trust fund I alone controlled, protected by layers of legal firewalls. So when my parents tried to casually discuss using that money like it was their piggy bank, I wasn't just furious. I was prepared. I looked up slowly, my eyes meeting theirs. "You should have asked me first," I said, voice steady but icy. My father's jaw tightened. My mother avoided my gaze. They didn't realize they'd just crossed a line they couldn't take back. Because from that moment, I stopped being the obedient daughter, the one who kept the peace and swallowed the betrayals. I was done being the family's ATM. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window in my old bedroom, staring out at the moss-draped oaks lining the street, thinking about what family really meant and what it meant to protect myself. They thought they could use me, but I had already taken steps to make sure they couldn't. That was the night I decided. No more compromises. No more pretending. No more waiting for someone else to save me. If they wanted to drag me into their mess, they were going to have to fight for it. The morning after that family dinner, I woke up with a single thought burning in my mind. I can't trust them. Not anymore. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not anyone who thought they had the right to decide my future behind my back. The first thing I did was check my phone again. The trust fund account. The balance was untouched. The fortress I had built was still standing, impenetrable. A quiet victory, but a vital one. See, I wasn't born with a silver spoon. My grandmother, Celestine, was a woman of rare cunning and vision. When she passed, she left me an inheritance, but she made sure I couldn't just take it and run. The money was locked away in a trust fund with conditions that only I could control. No one else, not my parents, not Jory, had access. It was my secret weapon. For months, I had watched my family spiral. Jory's debts were a bottomless pit, swallowing every paycheck, every handout, every favor. My parents patched it up with loans, side gigs, and sometimes lies. I never intervened, didn't want to be the villain, but I was ready. After that dinner, I knew it was time to draw a line in the sand. I sat down at my small apartment in Charleston, where I'd moved to escape the toxic web of my family's drama. My walls were bare, except for a few books and my laptop. I pulled up the trust documents again. I reread the terms, memorized the fine print like a prayer. This money was mine. It wasn't a bailout for my brother's reckless choices. It wasn't a safety net for my parents' mistakes. It was my future. I spent the next few weeks building my life on my own terms. I found a new job at a tech startup, something creative, fast-paced, something that made me feel alive. I networked, made connections, and pushed myself harder than ever. At night, I researched how to protect my finances further. Offshore accounts, additional trusts, legal barriers. I spoke to lawyers and financial advisors, making sure no one could touch what was mine without my permission. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from my parents or Jory, I hesitated. I wanted to answer to smooth things over, but I remembered that dinner, their voices cold and calculating. And I stayed silent. My world was getting smaller, quieter, but stronger. I learned to say no, first to my family, then to anyone who tried to drag me into their chaos. It wasn't easy. Loneliness crept in like a shadow. There were moments when I missed what family could have been. The laughter, the support, the simple comfort of belonging. But I had made my choice. To protect myself, I had to let go of the people who didn't protect me. That realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. One night, as the Charleston rain tapped softly against my window, I wrote a message I never sent. I love you, but I won't be your safety net anymore. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their forgiveness. I needed freedom. And for the first time in years, I felt it. I thought I was prepared for fallout. For the backlash that comes when you stand your ground against family who see your strength as a threat. But nothing could have readied me for the Cold War that began the moment I refused to help. 2 weeks after that dinner, I got my first real taste of what it meant to draw a hard line. It started with a phone call from my mother. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with false concern. "Alara, darling, we need to talk about Jory. He's struggling again. We were hoping you might reconsider helping out." I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch between us like a noose. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "Mom, I've made my decision. I can't and won't be responsible for his debts." The line went dead. Next came the texts. Passive-aggressive jabs masked as casual questions. "Don't you want to help your brother? Family is everything, Alara. You're so selfish." I didn't respond. Then the emails, long, guilt-laden letters from my father, trying to remind me of all the sacrifices they'd made, the money they'd spent raising me. "We always thought you understood family comes first." What they didn't realize was that family doesn't come first when it means destroying yourself. But the real test was yet to come. One afternoon, I was walking home from work through the bustling streets of Charleston when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. It was Jory. His voice was raw, shaky. "Alara, I'm in trouble. I need your help." I took a deep breath, fighting the rush of old emotions, the brother I once loved, the reckless gambler he'd become. "Jory, I can't do this anymore. You have to find your own way." He begged, pleaded, even threatened. Told me he'd lost everything, that if I didn't help, he'd be homeless. But I stayed firm. No promises. No money. No bailouts. After I hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that I wasn't being dragged down again. Sorrow for the family I was losing, the one I never truly had. That night, I sat alone, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Birthdays, holidays, moments when things seemed simpler. I realized I wasn't just cutting ties with my family's money or their problems. I was cutting ties with a past filled with broken promises and empty words. But I was also opening a door to something new, something better. To survive, I had to stop being their safety net. And to thrive, I had to become my own. After I shut that door on Jory's desperate call, the tension didn't just simmer. It boiled over. The family didn't confront me directly again. Instead, they waged a silent war. One fought with cold shoulders, whispered rumors, and subtle manipulations. I learned quickly that sometimes the most painful battles are invisible. At work, I kept my guard up. The startup was my sanctuary, but even there, The emotional weight followed me home. Each night, when I unlocked the door to my small Charleston apartment, I felt like I was stepping into a bunker, safe, but isolated. One evening, my phone buzzed with a new message. This time from my father's lawyer, a formal notice questioning the legitimacy of the trust fund. They were trying to find any legal crack, any loophole, to get their hands on my inheritance. I wasn't shocked, but I was angry. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about greed and control. I called my attorney the next morning, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Vivian Rhodes. She was everything I needed. Fierce, brilliant, and utterly loyal to me. "Vivian, they're trying to challenge the trust," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "Let them try," she replied. "The documents are airtight. Your grandmother wasn't careless. We'll shut this down before it even gets close to court." Her confidence steadied me, but I knew this was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, I heard whispers from mutual friends, stories that I was the black sheep, cold and distant, the daughter who abandoned her family. Social media posts hinted at a family tragedy without details, a public sympathy play that I was supposed to respond to. But I stayed silent. No explanations. No apologies. I didn't owe anyone that. Instead, I poured my energy into myself. I took extra shifts, invested in online courses, and started building a side business, consulting for startups on financial security. I wanted to prove, above all, that I was more than an inheritance or a family dispute. I was a woman creating her own legacy. One afternoon, I walked past a cafe where my parents often met friends. From a distance, I saw them. Lorraine laughing a little too loudly, Aldrich looking tired but guarded. They didn't see me. I didn't want them to. That moment was bittersweet. The family I'd known was fading, replaced by strangers who had once called themselves my parents. But I wasn't bitter. I was resolved. I was fighting to protect not just money, but my dignity. And in that silent war, I was learning how to win. The silent war dragged on longer than I expected. Weeks turned into months, and with every passing day, the distance between me and my family grew wider, like a canyon too vast to cross. But what really shook me wasn't just their tactics. It was the realization that some battles aren't just about money or pride. They're about breaking you down until you question who you are. One rainy evening, I was scrolling through my phone when a new message popped up from Jory. "Just one sentence, we need to talk. Please." I stared at it, heart pounding. Part of me wanted to believe this was an olive branch. Maybe he was ready to take responsibility. Maybe he was ready to change. But experience had taught me to be cautious. I texted back, when and where. He suggested a small diner on the outskirts of Savannah, a neutral place, away from prying eyes and family gossip. That night, I drove down the familiar highways, the rain blurring the streetlights into streaks of color. My mind was a whirlwind of hope, fear, and doubt. When I walked into the diner, Jory was already there. He looked worse than I remembered. Thinner, haunted, like the weight of his failures had crushed him. "I screwed up, Alara," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I've lost everything. And I'm scared." I studied him carefully. Was this the brother I once loved, or just another version of the reckless gambler who had dragged us all down? "I can't keep bailing you out," I said honestly. "But I can listen." 4 hours we talked. He confessed mistakes, begged for forgiveness, and promised to change. I wanted to believe him, but the scars of the past were deep. By the end of the night, I made a decision, not to give him money, but to offer him something else, a plan. A way out that didn't rely on my inheritance or their endless cycle of dependence. I told him about financial counseling, debt management programs, even support groups for gambling addiction. It wasn't the easy fix he wanted, but it was real. As I drove back to Charleston, the rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something different. Maybe family could mean more than betrayal. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't lose myself trying to fix everyone else. After that night at the diner, something shifted. Not just between me and Jory, but within myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was reclaiming control over my story instead of being dragged by everyone else's chaos. I decided to rebuild, piece by piece, starting with myself. My apartment in Charleston became my sanctuary. I invested in making it a space where I could think clearly. Fresh paint, plants that thrived despite my questionable gardening skills, and shelves filled with books on business, psychology, and personal finance. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Work at the startup was thriving, and the side consulting business I started was picking up clients faster than I expected. Helping other women and entrepreneurs protect their money gave me a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. But the most important foundation I laid was emotional. I started therapy. At first, I was skeptical. I thought I could handle everything on my own. But sitting in that quiet office, talking about my parents' betrayal, Dory's struggles, and my own fears, I began to understand how much I'd been carrying alone. My therapist, a kind woman named Mara, helped me see that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was survival. That saying no wasn't rejection. It was respect for myself. With every session, I felt lighter, stronger. Meanwhile, my parents' legal challenges against my trust fund fizzled out. Vivian, my lawyer, was relentless. Every attempt to poke holes in the documents was shut down. The trust remained intact, untouchable. One evening, after a long day, I got a call from Jory. He sounded different, quieter, more thoughtful. He told me he'd started attending support groups and was working with a financial counselor. I didn't say much, just listened. Maybe it was the distance, maybe it was time, but for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find some form of peace. Not family as it was, broken and toxic, but a new kind of family. One built on respect and honesty. That night, as I looked out over the Charleston skyline, the lights twinkling like promises, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building a future. My future. Just when I thought I had found my footing, the past came knocking again, this time in a way I wasn't prepared for. It was late October, and the crisp fall air in Charleston made the city feel alive with change. But inside me, there was an uneasy tension I couldn't shake. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's about your parents." My heart dropped. I hesitated, then called back. The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost sympathetic. A distant relative I barely knew, a cousin named Cashin, who had drifted away from the family drama but wasn't immune to its fallout. "Lorraine's not doing well," he said quietly. "It's serious. She's sick, Alara." A flood of conflicting emotions hit me. Part of me wanted to rush back, to be there despite everything. Another part screamed to stay away, to protect the life I had painstakingly built. I spent the night wrestling with my conscience. Was this a trap? A ploy to pull me back into the toxic web? Or was it a genuine plea? The next morning, I booked a flight to Savannah. When I arrived, the house felt colder than I remembered. The peeling paint and creaking floors seemed to echo the decay in my family's relationships. Lorraine was bedridden, frail and pale. Seeing her like that was surreal. The woman who once plotted to take my inheritance now so vulnerable. I stayed for a few days, not because I forgave them, but because I owed it to myself to confront the ghosts of my past. Our conversations were strained, layered with unspoken regrets. My parents apologized, but the words felt hollow. The damage was done. Yet, amid the quiet moments, I saw glimpses of the family I wished we could have been. Soft smiles, shared memories, even tears. Before I left, I told them plainly, "I'm not here to rebuild what was broken, but I'm here to close this chapter with honesty." Flying back to Charleston, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Some wounds heal only when we face them, but not all heal fully. I realized that part of me would always carry this family, not in the money, not in the drama, but in the lessons they forced me to learn. And those lessons were mine to keep. Returning to Charleston after that visit felt like stepping back into my own skin after shedding an old, heavy coat. The encounter with my mother had shaken me, but it also ignited a fire I hadn't realized was still burning beneath the surface. I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. It was time to thrive. I threw myself into my work with renewed purpose. My consulting business, which started as a side hustle, was rapidly growing. Women, entrepreneurs, and small business owners reached out to me for advice on protecting their assets, navigating financial pitfalls, and securing their futures. Every client's story reminded me of my own fight to guard what's mine and not lose myself in the process. With Vivian's help, I began exploring new investments, buying into startups, and building a diverse portfolio. I was no longer just the cautious girl who hid behind a trust fund. I was a woman creating wealth on her own terms. I moved into a loft in downtown Charleston, open, bright, filled with art that spoke to my vision of freedom and strength. The space wasn't just where I lived. It was where I dreamed and strategized. One night, after closing a major deal with a tech company, I stood by my window overlooking the harbor, the water shimmering under the moonlight. I felt a surge of pride and quiet joy. I was free, self-made, untouchable. But success wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my story and controlling my destiny. My phone buzzed. It was Jory again. This time he wasn't asking for money. He was telling me about the progress he'd made, the support groups he attended, the small steps toward rebuilding his life. I smiled, a real, unguarded smile. Maybe family could be complicated, messy and imperfect, but sometimes, even broken ties could find a new rhythm. That night, as I shut off the lights in my loft, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I wasn't just surviving the past. I was building an empire from it. By now, the noise from my family had all but faded into the background, the lawsuits dismissed, the messages unanswered, the expectations shattered. But what lingered was a quieter, harder battle, the struggle to truly let go. It's one thing to cut ties. It's another to stop carrying the weight of what could have been. Therapy helped, but some nights I still wrestled with memories. The dinners where laughter masked tension, the whispered plans to take what was mine, the brother I wanted to save but couldn't. One afternoon, I found myself back in the Charleston Park where I used to come as a teenager, a place that felt like a bridge between who I was and who I was becoming. Sitting on a weathered bench, I took out my journal. I wrote down everything: anger, sadness, guilt, hope. Writing wasn't just catharsis. It was a ritual, a way to release the past without erasing it. I realized that letting go wasn't about forgetting or forgiving blindly. It was about freeing myself from the prison of resentment. That evening, I called Mara, my therapist. "I'm ready," I told her. Ready to stop fighting ghosts and start living fully. We talked about boundaries, how they protect, how they empower. About self-worth, how it's the foundation for any relationship, even the one with yourself. As weeks passed, I felt lighter. The memories didn't disappear, but their hold loosened. I started reaching out to friends I had neglected, rebuilding connections that were real and reciprocal. I learned to say yes to joy, to spontaneity, to the messy, unpredictable beauty of life outside the shadows of my family's mistakes. And then, one morning, I woke up and realized something profound. I was whole. Not because my family was healed, not because the past was perfect, but because I had chosen peace over pain, freedom over fear. I had built a life that no betrayal could touch. And in that moment, I understood the true meaning of power. It wasn't in money or revenge, but in the courage to let go. The past was a storm I had weathered. But now, standing on the other side, I saw the calm horizon stretching out before me, vast, open, full of possibility. I had come a long way from that night when my parents' careless words threatened to steal my future. From the girl who quietly moved her inheritance into a trust, preparing for betrayal before it even came. Now, I was a woman who had forged her own path, who had turned pain into power and betrayal into strength. I woke up one morning in my loft, the sunlight streaming through the windows, casting patterns on the walls like a promise. No more guilt. No more waiting for approval. No more chains. I was sovereign. My business was thriving, my reputation growing. I had become a voice for those who refused to be defined by their family's failures. I spoke at conferences, mentored young entrepreneurs, and built a community grounded in resilience and dignity. And though my family was still a closed chapter, I had made peace with that. I wasn't angry anymore. I was proud. Proud of the woman who had refused to be a victim, who had rewritten her story in her own words. One afternoon, as I closed my laptop after finishing a keynote speech, My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. It was from Jory. Thank you for believing, even when it was hard. I smiled. That was all I needed. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. About reclaiming dignity. About choosing myself. And I had chosen well. I was free. I was unstoppable. I was sovereign.